France is just hours away from a nationwide lockdown. President Emmanuel Macron says the country is facing a public health war and that it will take an all-out mobilization to slow the spread of coronavirus. COVID-19 has killed 148 people in France and infected more than 6,600. All citizens will be required to stay home from midday. The restrictions will stay in place for at least 15 days.
On the front line, the caregivers at Lille University Hospital. When patients arrive with lung problems, they are taken to a special unit. But it's also important to keep the medical staff healthy. The priority is really to protect ourselves. We use protective clothing where we are with the patients. The Emergency Response Center in the city has seen 5 times as many calls as usual. The technology failed to keep up the pace. The computer system broke down.
The computers didn't stop for long because the engineers arrived immediately. Why? Simply because there were so many files that the hard drives ran out of memory. We never imagined that we could get there in such a short time.
In southern Alsace, one of the areas hardest hit by the virus, health authorities have already reached breaking point. There are almost no more intensive care beds. In his address to the nation, Emmanuel Macron announced that a military hospital will be set up in the region and the army deployed to transport the sick to hospitals.
We are at a war. We're in a public health war. We're not fighting against an army or another nation, but the enemy is here, invisible, elusive, an advancing enemy, and that requires general mobilization.
Hours before Macron commanded the French to stay home, people rushed to stock up on supplies. Starting from midday today, the movement of citizens will be tightly restricted. People will be allowed to leave only for essential activities like food shopping. Some 100,000 police will be deployed to enforce the lockdown.
Violation of these rules is currently punishable by a fine of around €38. It will be raised very quickly to a higher level, which could be €135. Our aim is not to punish, but to call everyone to account.
As doctors warn about an increasingly dire situation, many hope the aggressive move by France will save lives.
Our correspondent Lisa Lewis joins us now from Paris. Lisa, France faces a complete lockdown starting midday today. What's the situation in Paris where you are right now? How are people responding to the crisis?
Well, I think many people here were expecting that there were rumors going around that it would even be worse, actually, that we have to stay at home for 45 days, couldn't leave the house at all, and that there would be a complete curfew from 6 p.m. on. Now, what the president announced was a bit of a lighter version of that. However, many people are obviously not really happy about that. There are lots of people, it's reported that many people are actually leaving big cities such as Paris to go to the countryside and stay with someone for this period of 2 weeks. Some people, though, are expecting the president, the government, to maybe announce even stricter measures, thinking that this might be just the first step.
We see here live pictures as you speak, Lisa, of the Champs-Élysées. Still a lot of traffic, maybe people driving into the country or maybe not taking it seriously enough just yet. Yet experts warn of an increasingly dire situation. What does that mean for each and every one?
Well, it means that now from midday on, really, you will not be able to leave the house unless you go grocery shopping. You have to go to work. That is, you can't actually work from home. You have to take care of someone, for example, an elderly parent. And this all works with a declaration of honor that you have to download from the internet. You say, you know, I declare that I have to go to the shops now, and then you will be let through. You can also go for a run, for example, or walk your dog, and unless you go with someone. So the government is really trying to isolate people. I think now people are still trying to do the last thing that they needed to do before going into lockdown. That's why there are many people out in the streets, or many people are also leaving certain places to go to the place of confinement for the next 2 days.
Now, some in France say that we could soon see a scenario like in Italy, where doctors have to choose who to treat, a decision between life and death. How fast is the outbreak progressing in France?
It's progressing faster and faster. We're not at the Italian scenario just yet, but the number of contaminated people over the past 24 hours was at 1,200 compared to 800 the day before. So it's progressing faster, and that's also what the government wants to make clear to people, that if they want to prevent that Italian scenario from happening, that they have to stay at home. The president last night in his speech said several times, we are at war. He was appealing to the civil responsibility of each French person, each people living in the country, because obviously he had the impression that people weren't taking this seriously enough, especially as many people on Sunday afternoon, it was really nice and sunny here, were out in the streets, spending time with their friends close together, not respecting the minimum distance. And he really wanted to make clear that the French now have to change behavior if they want to prevent the Italian scenario from happening.
All right, Lisa Lewis, they're reporting from Paris. Thank you so much. Well, here in Germany, the government is also ratcheting up its response to the coronavirus outbreak. More than 7,000 Germans have been diagnosed with COVID-19. 17 have died. Chancellor Angela Merkel addressed the nation on Monday. Her message: no more travel, stay at home, keep your distance.
The chairs had been especially arranged to keep people well apart. But that wasn't the only thing out of the ordinary at this press conference. After high-level talks at the Chancellery, Merkel stepped out to announce the most drastic response to a health crisis in living memory. Retailers of essential supplies, such as pharmacies, will remain open. Supermarkets will even be open for an extra day on Sundays. But from playgrounds to hotels, leisure activities have been severely curtailed.
Hotel accommodation can only be rented for non-tourist purposes. That also means that there will be no holiday travel within Germany and abroad.
Bundestag President Wolfgang Schäuble met with party leaders to discuss how to keep parliamentary business running during the pandemic. Later in the day, Merkel held a telephone conference with state ministers over the new measures. Restrictions such as the closure of playgrounds are to be implemented uniformly across the entire country. In Germany, hospitals are well stocked, and the government is keen to allay fears over the fallout from the disease.
We are setting aside 10 billion euros to meet the costs arising from additional medical expenditure and the economic consequences of the virus. We are leaving no one behind.
A crisis committee set up by the Health and the Interior Ministries is meeting on Tuesday to help put in place the raft of restrictions. The question now is if the measures will succeed in slowing the spread of the coronavirus.
And for more on the situation here, let's bring in our political correspondent, Hans Brandt. Hans, new measures are practically announced on a daily basis now, but no complete lockdown as in Italy or France just yet. Why is Germany taking a less drastic approach than some of its neighbours?
I think there are two reasons for this. One is a formal reason. The fact is that the central government in Germany has not yet declared a state of emergency. In other words, it has not yet got the powers formally to impose such a lockdown. The other reason is I think that that final coercion is the final instrument that the government still wants to keep as a possible next step, while at the same time trying to in some sense, still force people not to go out, simply by making the reasons to go out all the more difficult, to reduce the number of reasons why people would like to go out. There's no reason anymore to go to the cinema because it's closed, to go to the theatre because it's closed, to go to your gym because it's closed. So people have no reason to leave their homes, and at the same time, this form of how shall I call it, maybe lockdown by persuasion is still an attempt to appeal to people's reasoning, to tell people, look, we are not going to force you to do this, but please, now, under these circumstances, you really must understand that it's necessary.
Especially as the number of cases keeps rising. How are Germany's hospitals and the health system as a whole coping right now?
At the moment, Germany has not yet reached the position where the number of serious cases that need hospitalization, that need intensive care, that need respiratory help, that number of cases is not so large yet that the German hospital system is under strain. The final wave that could overwhelm the hospitals has not yet arrived there, and that, in fact, is the reason for these new measures, and in fact the reason for all the measures that have been taken in recent weeks. It's to try and avoid that from happening, to try and prevent the large number of cases in fact coming into existence for such a large number of people to be infected so seriously that the hospital system breaks down. The hope is that the number of infections, the number of new infections will be reduced enough so that the hospital system in the end can cope with those people that need that critical care.
All right, our political correspondent Hans Brandt, thank you so much. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged all citizens to refrain from non-essential contact with one another to help slow the spread of coronavirus. He called on Britons to avoid all social venues as the country faces what he referred to as the fastest growth period of the virus so far. His government is still facing criticism for not ordering school closures. But Johnson said that social distancing measures will help to ensure the virus is a short-term problem.
Now is the time for everyone to stop non-essential contact with others and to stop all unnecessary travel. We need people to start working from home where they possibly can, and you should avoid pubs, clubs, theatres and other such social venues. We are asking people to do something that is difficult and disruptive of their lives, and the right moment, as we've always said, is to do it when it is most effective, when we think it can make the biggest difference to slowing the spread of the disease, reducing the number of victims, reducing the number of fatalities.
Well, our correspondent Birgit Maas joins us now from London. Birgit, Britain took its time to take measures. Why is the British government still only advising citizens to reduce their contacts instead of imposing mandatory measures?
Well, Boris Johnson put it this way. He said Britain is a mature and liberal democracy and he is trusting people to adhere to the government's advice. He also stressed, though, because of course he was questioned about that and whether more draconian measures and a bit more pressure might be needed. He said, we have the powers, we have the legislative, we have the emergency powers, so should need be, we can be more strict. But for the moment, Britain is not even closing down schools. So we can see, I think, that the situation is also going to accelerate. The British government had been under a lot of pressure over the weekend because even last week they were fairly lax and they said they're still monitoring the situation, but they're not really going as to closing down or advising people to stay in. So this has changed as of yesterday. And I can imagine that if they see maybe like in France, like Lisa Lewis has explained earlier, that the people are not adhering to it, that then they might change and might be more strict and actually really force people to stay indoors.
And would people then stay indoors? How is the British public responding to the crisis right now?
It seems that it's basically twofold. I know of some people who who are really worried, who have left London. London is ahead of the curve, as the government explained yesterday, in terms of cases. So people were worried with underlying health conditions that they couldn't be really helped here in London, and they even left the country to other countries where they thought they might be helped better. But then again, I also am seeing people still out and about, a lot of young people. I saw yesterday's not that much happening in the cafes and the bars as usual, but young people still out and about. I think they are taking it less seriously. They think they're just not as much in danger as others. But we will see. I mean, people have seen other European countries that have seen the examples. So I think people are braced for tougher measures to come.
Well, Birgit, I mean, all of this happens for Britain at a time where Brexit is still underway and, of course, where the National Health Service is also under strain. How is the health sector dealing with this?
Well, this is the biggest worry, that Britain, for example, has less hospital beds per capita than, for example, Germany or France. So the fear is that, as in other European countries, that the health service could be completely overwhelmed by severe cases. And the government has asked, for example, other industries, not health industries, to work together and to manufacture more respiratory equipment, because this is what's expected will be in shortage. So we are not there yet at the moment. It doesn't seem to be overwhelmed as yet, so we haven't had that. But doctors, we know, and people who work in hospitals, they're definitely worried that they might be in the future.
All right, Birgit Master reporting in London. Thank you. And here's a look at some more of the latest coronavirus developments. Hong Kong will quarantine all new arrivals for 14 days to preserve its current success at limiting the outbreak. South Korea will also tighten border checks after 3 days of reporting less than 100 new infections. The Philippines has suspended trade on its local stock exchange, becoming the first country to close its financial market over coronavirus fears. And Wuhan, the Chinese city where the virus was first detected, reported just one new locally transmitted case on Tuesday. Now, there were another 20 cases recorded in other parts of China, but they were all brought in from people travelling back from overseas. The city of Wuhan has announced all overseas returnees must now quarantine for 14 days. The first batch of medical workers began leaving from Wuhan on Tuesday morning. They have been supporting temporary and designated hospitals in the city of Wuhan for over a month. More than 42,000 medical workers from across China were dispatched to the area since the virus outbreak. Their departure comes as Chinese authorities begin to claim victory over the deadly virus.
China has fought the coronavirus with unified strength, and the crisis will soon be over. At least that's according to the daily stream of news from China's state television. Drastic measures undertaken by the Chinese government at the beginning of the crisis have in fact led to a drop in new infections. Thousands of patients have recovered. Many factories throughout the country have started up production again.
At the moment, we are at 70% of our capacity, but that figure will increase day by day.
The World Health Organization has praised China's response.
Praise China again and again, because its actions actually helped in reducing the spread of coronavirus to other countries.
The construction of an emergency hospital in Wuhan in just 10 days impressed the world. The hospital was closed on the 8th of March with all patients fully recovered, a fact that was proudly announced on Chinese state television. What media doesn't report is that Chinese President Xi Jinping has gone on record as saying he already knew about the virus outbreak by January the 7th. The public was only informed 2 weeks later. Chinese doctor Li Wenliang had already discovered the virus and warned of the dangers posed by it in December last year. He received a warning from police and was forced to write an official apology. He later became infected and died in early February. Other attempts by journalists and doctors to draw attention to the gravity of the situation and the initial incapacity of hospitals to deal with the crisis were brutally repressed. The whereabouts of several whistleblowers is still unknown. China has had success in battling the epidemic, but with 13,000 people still infected, the battle is far from over.
And for more, let's bring in now Derek Williams from our science department. Derek, we just heard that Chinese President Xi Jinping knew about the virus 2 weeks before he informed the public. How did this information come about, and did holding it back endanger public health?
Well, you know, hindsight is 20/20. I can't state too often or often enough that we've really entered uncharted territory. So I think trying to point fingers at China's behavior back in January at this particular juncture is pretty pointless. I think what's relevant is going forward now is to look at what China actually got right and why they've garnered this praise from the WHO, and try to maybe implement some of those successful measures in Europe and the US.
Well, certainly going by the data that we just received from China, the country seems to have won a major battle against coronavirus for now. Can the country relax now?
China is far from out of the woods on this. You know, their containment strategy is based on these draconian measures, and they appear to have worked. But there's, of course, a lot of fear about what happens next. You know, when these draconian measures are loosened, will the numbers of infected in the country shoot back up again? Are we going to see a second wave of infections? Will China re-import the virus? There are lots and lots of open questions, and we don't really have a lot of answers as of yet.
Now, of course, the virus came from China. The first cases started there, and we had several months here in Europe to observe. Should other countries, should we here in Europe adopt the same measures as China to beat the virus?
Well, the fears that China has are fears that every country is going to have if these measures do lead to containment, which is it's really far from certain. In Germany, for example, we're not looking at containment, really. The measures that have been implemented, which might actually at some point also lead to lockdown here, are not there to try to contain the virus. They're there to actually flatten this curve. I think that the German government is still going from the assumption that 60 to 70% of the population is going to at some point get it. And so the important aspect of importing those measures and looking at things like lockdowns here in Europe is not about containment. It's about an attempt to slow the progress. So health systems aren't overwhelmed. That's what they're trying to do with these measures, is flatten the curve.
Right, and flattening the curve is also aimed at hopefully eventually having enough time to come up with a vaccine. Where are we with the development of a vaccine right now?
Well, there was a surprise announcement actually yesterday that the first human trials are beginning with a vaccine in the U.S. Now that's incredibly quick. That's way faster than anyone would have predicted. But there's still a very, very long way to go. Just beginning testing. There's the safety aspects of a vaccine, which can't be overstated. You have to prove that it's going to be safe if you put it into people, that it's not going to actually do more damage than it was meant to control. And then once you've proven that it's safe, you still also have to prove whether or not it's effective. It's what's called its efficacy. Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? So, and all of that takes time. It just takes time. And all of the experts, in spite of the fact that they've even gone into human testing in such a rapid manner, everybody is still saying this is going to take at least a year and possibly much longer.
Right. Clinical trials take a lot of time, and then there are different standards when it comes to those trials in the United States or in Europe, where things usually take longer. Do you think, just a hunch, that given the current situation, the emergency, that things could be sped up and a vaccine could be provided sooner?
Well, I think that approvals authorities are going to be much more willing to take risks than they ever have been before. Generally, they're extremely conservative and very cautious when it comes to questions like this, because you can put people in danger with testing of this type of vaccine. But at this point, they're moving forward. The technology that they're moving forward with is not a live virus. It's not a weakened virus that they're injecting into people. What it is actually what's called an RNA vaccine. And that means they're injecting basically the information into people to get them to produce viral proteins themselves. And that will then kick the immune system into action. Or at least that's the hope. So in theory, at least, this isn't a dangerous step to take, and that's why they've taken the unprecedented step of allowing it to go forward so quickly.
All right, Derek Williams there from our science department. Thank you so much. President Donald Trump has also shifted his message on the coronavirus in the US. Trump spoke to Americans on Monday, telling them to stay at home and avoid crowds. Many states have already begun taking action.
This is Los Angeles, where the coronavirus has brought the city's pulsating social life to a grinding halt. It's just one city, with its streets empty, its shops closed and restaurants with drastically reduced customers. On the other side of the country, in normally bustling New York City, there are notably fewer people out and about. It appears Americans have heeded the advice of President Trump, who's been under fire for not acting quickly to stop the spread of the virus.
Therefore, my administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts.
As the Trump administration introduces stricter rules, testing for the coronavirus is increasing. Drive-through centres like this one in Ohio provide results in 8 to 12 hours. It's just one of many locations across the US with this service. In spite of the increasing measures, doctors are bracing themselves for a prolonged crisis.
Certainly this is not going to be something that lasts days, it's going to last weeks. If I had to guess right now, I would say we're in for at least a 3-month haul to deal with this virus before we really understand it and are able to cope with it in a more reasonable way.
A stark warning to Americans that the emergency is far from over.
Asian markets are seeing a bit of relief on Tuesday, trading mostly in the green after Wall Street had its worst day in more than 3 decades on Monday. Tokyo's Nikkei reversed losses from the day before. Stock exchanges in Hong Kong and Thailand also rose moderately. The rebound in Asia follows news from the White House that it's planning support for the air travel industry. The sector is reeling from the fallout of the coronavirus outbreak. The recent losses in global markets are the worst since the 2008 financial crisis. And meanwhile, the airline industry is working to fix its corona-related problems. Travel restrictions are not just affecting passenger travel, but freight as well. Every time a new country limits flights into and out of the country, that affects the global logistics chain.
This Boeing 777, owned by Lufthansa's freight subsidiary, is set to fly to Shanghai, full of machine parts and medications. All of Lufthansa's cargo aircraft are fully booked, as dispatchers work to reduce the backlog of goods from weeks of canceled flights. In the wake of the coronavirus crisis, it's not just goods that are complicating things.
Normally, we would do a direct flight, for example, from Frankfurt to Shanghai. We're currently operating in a security mode, a caution mode, over Novosibirsk in eastern Siberia. That means a stopover, and that allows us to have a crew change there and avoid spending the night in mainland China.
In the cargo area of Frankfurt Airport, containers and pallets are stacked and ready to ship. Canceled passenger flights from Lufthansa contributed to the backlog of freight. The German airline grounded thousands of flights across the world due to virus-related travel restrictions. And in the belly of almost every passenger plane was supposed to be cargo. The head of Lufthansa Cargo faces a dilemma. Many of his 4,000 employees aren't working, despite a big backlog of orders.
If you imagine that 50% of our capacity is in the bellies of passenger planes and that they're no longer flying or just to a limited extent, then of course we're short on capacity. And since we lack capacity, we also lack employment. So of course we're thinking of short-time work.
Stephen Haltmeyer is in a similar situation. He's the head of a medium-sized air and sea freight company. He's seen a 10% drop in assignments compared to a normal January or February. Because of the limited transport capacity and high prices, his company has to turn away orders from some customers.
At the moment, planning is almost impossible. We're living day to day, not thinking about tomorrow. We've come to grips with the situation in China, but other markets are coming, like the USA.
Adding to that concern are worries around additional corona outbreaks in Germany. If too many employees fall ill, some branches may have to shut down completely.
Car makers, including Volkswagen and Fiat Chrysler, have scaled back production at their European plants as coronavirus restrictions put the squeeze on production lines. They're also facing questions of demand, with more and more people forced to stay at home, except for strict working needs. Many forecast a heavy fall in car sales in March.
Volkswagen had been looking forward to a bumper year after the Dieselgate disaster, but now it's slashing output at its Lisbon plant because workers aren't turning up. Portugal ordered all schools closed in response to the coronavirus outbreak, leaving many employees struggling to take care of their children. VW says it'll suspend operations in Bratislava after Slovakia declared a state of emergency over the virus. Meanwhile, Italian-American company Fiat Chrysler says it's halting production for 2 weeks at most of its European plants to help protect staff and adjust to a slump in demand. And just days ago, Renault-Nissan, as well as VW's Seat unit, announced temporary stoppages in Spain that could last for days or weeks. And France's PSA had hoped to capitalize on the Car of the Year award for its Peugeot 208 model. But now it's shutting down its European factories until March.
Well done.
The news sounds bleak, and it is. But analysts say Europe's car industry suffers from oversupply, which an industry-wide closure could fix. And people in the market for a car will likely still buy one, even if they have to wait.
And the world of sports has also suffered under the weight of the pandemic, with many countries banning all sporting events in the near future. Germany's Bundesliga clubs have confirmed that football matches will be suspended until early April. Further postponements are expected to be announced after another meeting in 2 weeks' time. The German Football League convened a meeting with all 36 clubs from the country's top 2 divisions. Chief Executive Christian Seifert said the health and financial security of all 56,000 football employees was the highest priority. On Tuesday, Europe's governing body UEFA will meet to discuss the future of the European Championship. And in a blow for organisers of the Tokyo Olympics, the IOC has announced that all qualifying tournaments for boxing have been suspended due to the coronavirus outbreak. The European qualifiers were underway in London over the weekend, but will now be halted after an initial decision to continue without spectators. The IOC aimed to still complete qualifying in either May or June. But the Olympics governing body is holding executive talks on Tuesday to discuss the latest developments.